Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
And the spacecraft, in increasingly small pieces of debris, rained down into the ocean off the coast of Florida. Now, we want to use our small model. We're going to give a slow motion videotape look at what happened. But before we do so, a review. This is a scale model. This is the space shuttle itself. Keep in mind the crew has only a small area in which it's actually housed for most of the time. Most of the space shuttle is in the cargo area. Down below that, the cargo area that opens up, that's where the satellites are launched from once the shuttle gets into orbit. The space shuttle itself sets aboard a huge fuel tank, about 500,000 pounds of liquid oxygen and hydrogen. This fuel is what fuels the space shuttle's own engines, the 3 engines right in the tail of the space shuttle. But those 3 engines are not enough to get the space shuttle up into orbit. So on launch, the space shuttle's own engines have to be going, drawing on the liquid oxygen and hydrogen fuel, and the 2 solid rocket boosters off to the side of the main fuel tank are part of the original launch configuration. These are the solid rocket boosters. At launch, the solid rocket boosters go, the space shuttle's own 3 engines go, and to get it off the pad, then the commander of the space shuttle throttles back to about 60% in order to get maximum effect. The aerodynamics of the situation require him, with gravity figured in, to throttle back to about 60-65% of power. Then at a certain stage, after this whole apparatus, the solid rocket boosters, the main tank, and the shuttle itself get up and make a slight turn. Plan is, and always has been, for the space shuttle commander to throttle up. Those are the last words from the space shuttle, Roger, throttling up. And it was shortly after that that the whole thing exploded. Now watch on the slow motion videotape, because down in here, in what we will call the left, in the lower side of the left solid rocket booster, you will first see some little indications of possible flames could have been caused by vapors, and then the whole explosion occurred. Let's go now to the slow motion videotape as we wait and prepare for NASA's news conference. You see the little flame in the middle left-hand side. Then the beginnings of an explosion, just exactly where it's happening, hard to tell. Could be in the solid rocket boosters, could be in the main tank. Then, once the explosion, the flames explosion, reach the main tank, which has that highly explosive, highly volatile liquid hydrogen, the space shuttle is obliterated. No ejection seats aboard the space shuttle. The early space shuttles had ejection seats, but after the first 3 or 4 flights, ejection seats, because of the increasing numbers of people put aboard the space shuttle and the belief that ejection seats wouldn't do any good, there were no ejection seats on this space shuttle. Note in the upper right-hand quarter of the screen, I know that that's gone off of your screen for the moment, there was a piece of what is believed to be the right-hand solid rocket booster. You see in the upper right-hand quarter, that's it, a piece, if not indeed the entire, what is believed to be the right-hand side solid rocket booster. Remember that the early indication of trouble was on the lower left-hand solid rocket booster side. No ejection seats aboard the space shuttle today. As Leo Krupp, our consultant with CBS News from years past, has pointed out, there is a moment, a second, one's tempted to say a nanosecond, but just a few seconds in which the pilot of the space shuttle, the commander and the pilot or co-pilot who's monitoring, when he sees a red light, there's a few seconds there where if he knows there is trouble, that he can have the spacecraft itself separate from all of this fuel and the solid rocket boosters. That did not happen today as far as anyone can determine. NASA at Mission Control in Houston simply did not know in the minutes right after the explosion what had happened or why it had happened. But there was no indication that during those moments when the pilot could have separated the space shuttle from all of this fuel, there's no indication that he even attempted to do so. We simply don't know whether he had even the slightest indication of trouble aboard the spacecraft. One wants to keep in mind, need we remind ourselves, that we're still in the infancy of space exploration and travel, that we're in the very, historically, the very earliest seconds of space exploration. And that while we've learned a lot about spaceships, fuel, mixing liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, computers, telemetry, aerodynamics, and all of that, that we only know such a tiny amount, really, about how it all works, where we can proceed from here. And it's in that atmosphere, from a, one doesn't want to say historical standpoint, but from that atmosphere that those 7 Americans were aboard the space shuttle today. One of the things that these flights is designed to do is to increase man's knowledge about space flight. That's what happened this morning, both in real-time videotape and the slow-motion videotape. And as we await President Reagan's talk to the American people, you may want to ponder a poem called High Flight by John Gillespie McGee, Jr., a 19-year-old American volunteer with the Royal Canadian Air Force who was killed in training December 11th, 1941. And he wrote a poem called High Flight. And it reads, "Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue. I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God." In the wake of the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger at Cape Canaveral, Florida, this morning, shortly before noon Eastern Time, we take you now to the White House in Washington for a talk by the President of the United States.
15 seconds. 10 seconds. Stand by, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers and overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista Mikaloff. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, "Give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy." They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
Live from the White House in Washington, D.C., the President of the United States with a talk to the American people on this day when 7 of their fellow Americans, 7 individual and unique human beings, apparently perished in the fireball that became the